Greetings, Otaku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you yet again another Boardwalk Empire episode review right here on Otaku Assemble! Weekly, as always, I'm here to bring you the latest in this week's Boardwalk Empire episode reviews. Now, this week's episode, this is Season 2, Episode 9, and it's entitled Battle of the Century. And rightfully so. So pretty much the big things that took place in this week's episode. I'm going to kick things off first with Jimmy. Now, if you all will recall from last week's episode, you know, the big shocker in last week's episode was that Nucky had seemingly turned over Atlantic City over to Jimmy and to his faction. So then, of course, now, Jimmy's the boss of Atlantic City now. He's the top dog. He's the king, as they have addressed him. Last week's episode they addressed him as Prince James, because that was identifying the Commodore as still being, the king. But this week's episode, especially with the scene with Jimmy and Richard while they were listening to the fight over the radio, the two chicks addressed him as the king. So anywho, this week's episode picks up with Jimmy and his associates actually making a deal with Remus, who is, if you all will remember from earlier in the season, Remus is the guy from Cincinnati, who Nucky made a deal with earlier in this season. But then, of course, because of everything that's been going on, that's pretty much fell through. So Jimmy is picking that back up. The second biggest thing that happened with Jimmy was the second deal he made, where Jimmy actually reached out to Waxy Gordon. And if you all will remember who Waxy Gordon is the guy that Nucky also made a deal with earlier in this season. And when Jimmy went to Philadelphia and met up with Manny for the first time, that's Waxy's competitor. Now, and this is the, I'll be honest with you guys, this is the thing about Jimmy that I haven't really cared for. In the case of Manny, because I do want to talk about this, Jimmy reached out to Manny. Why? Because that was a connect that he needed in order to rival Nucky. Okay? Nucky's Philadelphia affiliate was Waxy Gordon. Who's his rival? Manny. Who was Jimmy battling with earlier in the season? Nucky. So who does he need on his side? Manny. However, now that Nucky's out of the picture and Jimmy's kind of taking over things, it seems like Jimmy's forgetting the people that got him there in the first place. Now, I know that Jimmy doesn't like Manny, and they haven't really gotten along from Jump Street. Not really. We know that they don't really care, they don't really like each other. But the thing is, why make an enemy of Manny? Earlier in the episode, earlier in this review, referring to a scene earlier in this episode, when I talked about, the whole George Remus deal, Jimmy was there with all of his peeps, including Capone was there, Doyle was there, Luciano, and Luciano's partner, who I can never remember his name, but Luciano's partner said simply, pay Manny or bring him in on the Remus deal as a partner. Either way, get that guy off your back. If Jimmy didn't want to do any more business with Manny, why not just do that? Just pay the man off, or bringing him in as a partner would mean he'd have to continue working with him. You don't want to work with him anymore. Just fucking pay the man the money you owe. See, this is my thing with Jimmy. Jimmy is in the wrong because you owe that man money. I don't give a shit if you don't like him. You owe him fucking money. You're in the fucking wrong. You don't want to be bothered with him anymore. Yes, there are two options. Yes, you can either clip him or you can pay him off. What I'm saying is, why? Jimmy, you've already have You already have a failed assassination attempt on your hands so far in the season. Why risk it once again by creating an enemy that you do not need? See, Jimmy is riding on his high horse right now, and that's going to lead to his downfall. Why would you make an enemy of... I understand the whole wanting to do business with Waxy Gordon deal. I get that. Why? Because Jimmy is now, he's absorbing all of Nucky's business. He's absorbing all of his connections, all of his deals. But why make an enemy of Manny? Which led to the assassination attempt on Manny, which failed once again, even though that was Waxy Gordon's call. That wasn't Jimmy's call. Waxy was the one who put that thing into motion. But it failed, and now Manny knows, or he suspects, who was behind it. Why, Jimmy? Why would you do that? Anywho, so now getting away from Jimmy, because he just kind of pissed me off. He's starting to piss me off for real in this season. And the reason for that being is because, quite honestly, Jimmy hasn't been himself all season. All season, Jimmy has been operating the way that others have expected him to. You know, earlier in the season with his father and his mother and the peer pressure from his associates. Jimmy has been doing everything according to how other people have wanted him to. He's never really done what he wanted to. He has yet to act like the Jimmy that we saw from the first season. So yeah, I don't really care for Jimmy in this season, which is heartbreaking for me because that's who I was rooting for. Anywho, moving on, now that that little rant's out of the way, moving on, what else occurred in this week's episode? Nucky took a trip to Belfast to meet up with, I believe, to pronounce it was John, was it McGorricle or McGonagall? I believe. Anywho, if you all will remember from earlier in the season, John is, I believe he's a member of the IRA, and he was the guy who brought Owen to, Owen Slater, he was the guy who brought Owen to Atlantic City because he was reaching out to Nucky, because of course, Ireland's fight for independence hasn't been going the way they've wanted it to, and so they needed to reach out to a friendly face from across across the Atlantic. And we haven't seen him since. This is actually, I believe, the second time this season that we've seen him. What Nucky has done, Nucky has gone to Belfast to meet up with him to make a deal. In exchange for, I believe he wanted 10,000 cases of Irish whiskey, he would be giving them weapons. Because as we saw in last week's episode, when Nucky took the trip to the armory and he found out that they have a lot of surplus weapons, that is what he needs. That's actually like, perfect timing. Hey, I looked up, they called it perfect timing. That's actually perfect timing because he can use that to his advantage. And also, it lets us know that Nucky's not out of this game yet. He's not out of it yet. He has allowed for his enemies to think that he's out of the game, when in fact he's about to come back bigger and badder than ever before. But of course, this faced some opposition when he was in Belfast because the IRA, or at least John's faction of the IRA, they have been approached with the prospect of a truce between them and England. Whether or not there was any truth in that became irrelevant at the end of this week's episode, because John was fighting Nucky tooth and nail on that deal, and neither, he wouldn't give in because he's fighting for a truce. Well, he got clipped at the end of the episode, and the guy who's taking over now wants to make the deal. So boom, Nucky has his deal. However, before leaving Belfast, Nucky once again has approached Owen and told him, look man, I don't like secrets, so I don't think Nucky has the slightest idea of the secret that Owen is keeping from him, which is the affair that he had with Margret. I don't think Nucky suspects that, but I think Nucky suspects something else. So it's going to be kind of interesting seeing how that unfolds, because Nucky is suspecting something else, and he is going to find out about the Margret situation, and that's going, like I said, it's going to be interesting to see that. So we got a couple of other scenes, such as the new assistant attorney. Apparently she's sleeping with, she's banging her partner, who didn't see that coming. I sure as hell didn't. And then of course, apparently that investigation is they're starting to squeeze some of Nucky's former affiliates, and it looks like they're moving in on Eli, because especially based off of the preview for next week's episode where Eli is actually in jail, so they're starting to squeeze them. Also, we got the scenes where what is his name? It's I want to say Percy is his name. The cat that Chalky had a little beef with when he had to spend some time in a pen. Yeah, we saw him at his job, and apparently now it seems like he's working with Chalky in initiating those strikes that Chalky got the go-ahead to do at the end of last week's episode from Nucky. So that whole thing's taking place, and based off of next week's episode, looks like that's about to send fucking Atlantic City into a state of chaos. A huge strike like that by the African American community. But I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to wrap up this review with what has occurred in this week's episode with Margret, because apparently little Emily Schroeder has fallen victim to polio, and that's been, that's what's consumed Margret in this week's episode, which it is fortunate, because while I don't care for Margret as a character, I have I don't care for Teddy either, because he's going to grow up to be a little fucking psychopath. But Emily was adorable. That's one of those side characters that if they were to kill her off, I think that'd be pretty lame. If they killed off little Emily, I think that'd be really lame on So, with that said, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to wrap this review up. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. And as always, feel free to comment below. Let me know what your thoughts on the episode were. What do you expect to happen next week, so on and so forth. And as always, feel free to comment, rate, subscribe. But that'll do it for me this week. This has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, signing off. And until next week, later.